Hi guys, welcome to Amsterdam. You want to come on up? My name is Robert Aronson. I'm the owner of Aronson Antiques in Amsterdam. And actually, we've been in this street for more than 120 years now. Ever since the Rijksmuseum was finished in 1885, my family moved here from the city of Arnhem. We've occupied a gallery just on the canal over there, number 64 just across the street. My grandfather moved to this building, and in the meantime we even made a little outing to a bigger gallery just down the street. We specialize in Dutch Delftware, and I would love to show you a little bit more inside. You want to come on in? I'm happy to have you here, and I would love to tell you a little bit more about the history of the company and especially the history of Dutch Delftware. Like I said, the company was founded back in 1881. It's already a long time ago, but there's always been a main theme in the collection of the gallery, and that was Dutch Delftware. When I joined the business back in 1990, we were general antique dealers with Chinese porcelain and rugs and silverware and glass, clocks and furniture and everything else. But the main passion of my grandfather and my father and myself has been Dutch Delftware. And the history of Dutch Delftware actually starts before the city of Delft. There were many pottery factories throughout Holland, and this is a beautiful early dish made around 1620-25, made in the Netherlands, predating Delftware as such. And as we can see, this is a majolica dish, a Dutch majolica. We can tell that it has those 3 spur marks on the front that they were actually fired on. I will tell a little bit more about that later on. And if I may turn the plate around, it has a complete lead glaze on the back, so you can see the earthenware through it. It's not white the way the potters wanted it on a later date. So right around this time, Chinese porcelain was being imported to the Netherlands by the Dutch East India traders. The VOC was founded in 1602, and they were bringing back these type of objects, Chinese porcelain, from around 1700, 1710. Now this is a very novel thing in the Netherlands when it arrives. It's so pristine, so perfect, much thinner than the material that they've seen until then. So the potters started to emulate that, started to produce something that looked much closer than that. But they had one trouble, and that was the spur marks on the front, the marks that they wanted to get rid of. And that was something that the Delft potters found out. They were able to place the spur marks on the back. Let me tell you a little bit about the production process of these objects. Because what I have here is the original spur to one of these plates. And these spurs, they all look alike, and they fit these 3 dots in the middle of the plate exactly. These plates were fired upside down, 7 to 10 stacked on top of each other, and that is how the dirt landed on the backs of the plates and not into the beautiful decoration of the front of the plate. Now also what I have here is part of those original saggers. So this is a cylinder, or you can imagine it being a cylinder, with these spurs sticking through the edge of these saggers, and the plates being stacked on top of those, again 7 to 10 high. Now the production process was of course constantly in ceramics. Although the Delft potters were calling it porcelain, porcelain hadn't been invented in Europe yet. That only came about 100 years later, around 1710. So although the Delft potters were actually calling their wares porcelain, it wasn't porcelain, it was earthenware, faience. Porcelain was only invented around 1710 in Europe and wasn't at hand when these pieces were made. So this pristine and very thinly potted objects, they couldn't be made, but they came very close. Let me show you one superb example. This is a Delft dish from around 1700, and it's a direct copy actually of a so-called kraak dish. The name kraak came from the Portuguese ships, the caracas, and the porcelain that was taken by the Dutch traders from those Portuguese ships was these types of ware with these panels in the borders, with some beautiful decoration in the center, ducks, sometimes a hare, sometimes just flowers, but the setup of the dishes that they took from the Caracas ships were exactly like this. The Dutch people enjoyed that wares very much, so they started to produce them in Delft also, and this is a very beautiful and refined example of that. You just want to join me here to the window where I can show you the detail of this dish in the beautiful light from the outside, because it really makes a huge difference. If you come close and have a look at these ducks, they're not just blue ducks sitting in this landscape. The lines around them are darker blue, maybe even black, and that really what makes the contrast between the normal blue and white pieces, the contrast is much higher because of this very thin line placed around these objects. And this was done only in a couple of factories in the city of Delft. Of course, the quest for ceramics was so high that by the end of 1700s, there were more than 30 factories in the city of Delft producing ceramics. Only 5 of those factories were producing superb high quality pieces like the piece that I'm holding right here. The potters in Delft were so precise in emulating the Chinese porcelain that they even looked at the backs. And let me give you a little tip. The first thing that you should do when looking at Delftware is actually look in the back, because it tells the entire tale. Firstly, of course, you see the earthenware shining through, which is the ceramics and not the porcelain. Porcelain would be white and much harder. But you also see these little pinholes. This is where the glazing was absorbed by the faience in the production process. So whenever you get a piece of Delftware in your hands, make sure that you turn it around first of all. Look for the ceramics on these edges. The pinholes is something that really tells the tale. And of course the 3 little spur marks that I've shown you before. One of the other things that you should always be looking at when you're looking at Dutch Delftware is actually the rim of things. Because it's earthenware, it's much softer around the rim than Chinese porcelain. So where a Chinese porcelain piece, or any porcelain piece actually, would be absolutely perfect, the Delftware objects always have these little break marks on the edges of objects. And that was there from the very first moment. So let me take this sugar caster here, and one is actually a bit better than the other. You can really see that the sugar caster has some break marks where maybe it was bumped or even the glazing got too warm in the production process itself already. So that is very much a telltale also that you're looking at ceramics and not at porcelain. The Delft potters very quickly moved from direct copying Chinese porcelain to emulating the Chinese styles and decoration types onto European shapes. A very nice example is this flower vase here from just after 1700. It's a vase that was placed against a wall, like it is here actually, with a row of spouts on the front and a row of spouts on the top to hold flowers. Now the term tulip vase is a 19th century term. These vases were actually used for all kinds of cut flowers. But there was a third way of copying Chinese porcelain, and that was not by copying the actual porcelain itself, but by copying drawings that were made by Dutchmen who traveled to, or maybe even stayed in Holland and wrote about, China and the Far East. With these objects like the flower vases, the Delft potters really became market leaders, and other factories all over Europe and even in China, they were looking at what the Delft potters were doing. Then move half a century later and they were market leader. They were producing these tableware objects, tureens for on the table, and factories like Strasbourg, but also Meissen and Sèvres were looking at what Delft was doing and started to produce wares that were in line with these ceramics. Of course, the dinner table and dining was socially even more important than it is nowadays. And the host of the evening would probably have one of those puzzle jugs to entertain his guests, because he would fill this with red wine and then pass it around for his guests to drink from it. But how do you drink from a pierced neck jug? That's why it's called a puzzle jug. Now, of course, the first person would try and solve this puzzle by pouring in between the gaps, and of course his shirt would be completely covered with red wine. The second one would think, hey, why the spouts are there? Maybe I can suck up some wine through one of the spouts. But sucking up on one of the spouts, you would draw in air from the other spouts. Third person in line would cover 2 spouts, again try to draw some wine from the spout, but still his clothes would get covered with red wine because of the hole under the ear. Then the final person would know and be very dexterous, close the hole under the ear, close 2 of the spouts, and drink from this puzzle jug like you would draw it up from a straw. Very ingeniously made Dutch Delftware, really to entertain your guests. Maybe you want to sit down with me for a second and let me tell you a little bit about provenance. Because provenance, of course, is also getting more and more important in our field of the business. And what I have here is these 2 beaker vases. Although the colors are Japanese inspired, the decoration is really a Chinese taken decoration again with the pagoda houses. Now these 2 vases, these 2 actual vases, were sold from the collection of Georges Petit in Paris in 1913, and we can trace the lineage since then. Part of these two vases was a vase and cover that would sit in the middle of these two, and that was collected by John Loudon and bequested to the Rijksmuseum in 1916. Let me show you the detail on these wonderful vases. If you look at the little bird here, then you can see the level of detail that they were able to capture on these vases. The little Chinamen crossing a bridge into their pagoda houses. Really a superb quality pair of vases. But I can tell you a little bit more about the Loudon collection if you want to join me to the library, where I have an incredibly rare book about his collection actually. Well, welcome to the throbbing heart of our business. It's actually only part of our library, but I'm just as passionate about books on Delftware as I am about the Delftware itself. And I mentioned already a very rare catalog that I have here. Only a handful of these are known. When John Loudon started to collect his Delftware, he wants to know more about it, and he actually employed a Frenchman called Henri Havard to write about his collection of Delftware and to research it. And this book from 1878 is the publication about his collection, about the Loudon collection made by Henri Havard. Now, Henri Havard gained so much knowledge through the research of the Loudon collection that he went on from the 1878 production of that book to a much bigger work on Dutch Delftware, which is still actually the Bible on Dutch Delftware, with all the marks and the history. He made some mistakes, but we forgive him 140, 150 years later. And this book was published in 1878 in Paris. And if you want to have a look, there's a lot of beautiful, well, drawings actually, prints of Dutch Delftware. Every name that he could find in the archives is named in here. Marks are copied, dates are drawn into the book. So it's really a vast, an enormous amount of research that is being reproduced here in this rare set of two books, Henri Havard. So this is the original 18th century book. It was published in 1794, and it contains the original prints, here part of the production process where the potters are glazing their wares in a bath of glaze. Looking back at the Rijksmuseum collection, there's actually quite a number of museums around the world that have Delftware collections. And one of our beautiful sales was a sale to the Metropolitan Museum in New York of a vase and cover very similar to this. And you can actually check out our website, aronson.com, to see which museum has Delftware collections, because every month we look at other museums with Delftware collections in them. Of course, some museums are bigger collections, like the Gemeentemuseum, now called the Kunstmuseum in The Hague, the Rijksmuseum in Amsterdam, the Brussels Museum. But there's also a lot of smaller museums that have some wonderful pieces of Delftware. Our website has always been a very important source of information, actually already since 1995, but we're taking it to the next level, because if you're not able to come here and see this vase in person, go to our website and visit the AR version of it, the augmented reality version, and you can play around with the vase in your own surroundings, at your own home, turn around, get into the detail of it, and study it from afar. Of course, it's not the same as being here and looking at the object, but it comes very close. So I hope I was able to tell you a little bit more about Dutch Delftware and the history of the product. But when you're looking at Dutch Delftware, make sure that you keep a couple of things in mind. Turn the object around, look at the details, look at the spur marks and see how the object was actually produced. Don't worry too much about the condition. Of course it is important, but the Delftware always have a little bit of chips and nibbles around the edges. That's part of it. Have some fun with the Delftware. Make sure that you take a puzzle jug, fill it with red wine and enjoy it. Become part of its provenance maybe even, and try to own a piece of Dutch Delftware, become part of history. And when you go out, study objects, see museum collections, see our booth at TFAF, but also pick up some books, see collections there, and our website aronson.com. Enjoy it very much.